So many people are looking to live happier, more stress-free lives. We provide interviews from mental health experts across various fields because we know finding quality information isn't always easy. Let's find more sanity together.
Welcome back to the second episode of Sanity, part of the ABCT Sanity collaboration with Shannon and Blakey. We are talking about non-for-profit research careers. We just had a whole episode, if you didn't listen to it, on what type of careers you could look at, what it's like to be having one of these non-for-profit jobs, and a whole episode on that. This one is going to focus more so if this is what you want to do, how do you get ready for that job? So the first place that I would like to start is if somebody is, let's go with grad school, but it could also be undergrad, like if you're going for a position that doesn't need a graduate degree, because that's possible as well. So I don't want to limit it. What sorts of things do you think people should make sure to have on their resume or CV, and what experiences should they gain if they do want to come into this sector?
For undergraduate or graduate students, having research experience, even if you don't want to be leading proposals and leading projects, having exposure, because it's the general skills development unrelated to the specific topic matter that you gain from those experiences. So how to pay attention to detail, how to balance competing and how to prioritize competing deadlines and responsibilities, how to communicate effectively with team members, how to move tasks forward individually without anyone checking in on you every day to make sure to hold you accountable. So getting research experience is really important on both ends. We do hire individuals immediately out of undergraduate to work. Sometimes it's people's stepping stone before they pursue graduate training. Not for everyone, though. The role that we use here is analyst, and it's a happy coincidence I've gotten to work with full-time analysts who I did know through UNC training back in the day, and so that was really special. Research experiences, and I would say perhaps more mixed methods has been particularly important or useful in this setting.
Anything outside of like getting community service, I don't think is the answer, but is there anything outside of research that people could think about potentially trying to get more experience in?
Yes. Speaking and communicating. So I don't know if everyone needs to take an improv class. I had taken some in undergraduate. I did some as I hand out flyers for many to get free classes. And I just did it to do it. And I've learned that I'm a lot better at conference presentations when things inevitably go wrong, because I learned how to yes and. I learned how to just go with the people up on the panel. And so whether that, is non-academic communication skills, getting exposure, whether it's through teaching opportunities, brown bags, conference presentations, just going up to people who seem scary to you and striking a conversation, all the small talk and networking at conferences. And that has been really helpful, because a general skill unrelated to my topic area that I do every day and certainly was instrumental in me getting this position is communicating my skills, abilities, interpretations, goals, and proposals to other audiences. Sometimes it's using the specific terminology and referencing specific theories or people unique to my area. Sometimes it's talking about mental health in general to folks who know what that means. Sometimes it's talking to other scientists from other disciplines, and sometimes, a lot of the times, it's to the lay public, whether that's in reports that go out or to funders who manage portfolios, but themselves are no longer actively doing research or consumers of the research. There's also a lot of community engagement, lived experience consultants, community-based participatory research. So how do we not only talk about what we're doing, but in an inclusive way, not just teaching other people or talking at other people so they understand the words, but really engage them and have them be important partners in that all along the way.
Do you think it's important, and even if it's in one of those buckets, having a focus in helping the world or helping people? Like, do you think it's that's an important topic to be honest, or just more so just getting good research experience and getting good communication opportunities and presenting under your belt and ability to connect?
I think Well, my answer is yes. And I think I had just assumed that because that is so central to how I approach it. And the team members that I work with were so passionate about what we do because it is improving the world or people or subpopulations that we identify with or have committed our work toward. Wanting to use knowledge for good, turning science into practice is a huge component of it. It's not only a motivating driver, but I think the values compass that keeps it going in the right direction. We're all humans and have limitations and blind spots, but when the intention is to do well for others, that tends to be a good guiding force.
Yeah. And I don't think many people are doing research to do harm to I'm sure there's some people out there, but I don't think that's most research, but I think it does go on a scale of research on doing things for the greater good versus doing something to make profit or doing something to carry an agenda, like that you have a narrative that you're trying to pursue. So the research could be just as good and just as stringent, but the intention or the purpose behind it can be a bit dimensional. That's why I asked that. If somebody is doing something that's more on the other side, do they have to be terrified and jump off and get into that, or might that still be okay?
Still okay.
Still okay. Don't freak out. Can we take a second and talk about that improv recommendation? You are the first person on the show to say this. I absolutely love it. I recommend it all of the time. Go take an improv class. I mean, I'll let you speak to it more, but just in a nutshell, you're on the stage and it's just a topic, and everybody on that stage takes a bent on it, says a name, a little bit about where they are, and you have to memorize it. So that's a little bit of like a memory game, which makes you really good when you're at a networking event, meeting multiple people, holding their information, and then you take it, you engage, you have to be creative. You do not know what's coming at you. You need to improv. You need to go with it and try and make something productive out of it collaboratively with other people. And one thing that you don't want to do in improv is kind of like be the center of attention where you steal the whole thing, which also makes you a good team player. And then you talked about yes and, which is if somebody brings something up, rather than trying to shoot it down, how do I take it and add to it and make it more functional? So it could have been super functional, but maybe it wasn't. But you have the ability to work with somebody else, build them up, and then take it to go somewhere that's productive. Okay, let me pass it to you. What other thoughts do you have about improv and why taking these classes is so great for anybody's professional development, even outside of what me and you do?
Yes, it's so collaborative, like you said, of you're working with the team on a goal, and on the improv stage, it's generally to make people laugh. And that's a very admirable goal. I think also the idea of not always having to be the one to deliver the punchline. It's also basketball season. So it's about assists, not just the dunks and three-pointer shots that you get to make yourself, but how are you helping your teammates succeed? For me, I have always been shy, still am, despite my 30-something years of working on that. But what improv did give me was I'm no longer concerned when I have a question that I wasn't expecting. Or there's a situation that arises I wasn't anticipating. I don't worry. It's like the meta distress. I'm not distressed about being caught off guard. I'm not distressed about being distressed in the moment because you can flex and find the way to move forward from it. Yes, and is a wonderful philosophy. I very much enjoy it of not needing to shoot someone down or correct someone unless there's a potential harm or bad direction that a misinterpretation can go, but just building off it and working with people and make them feel good and enjoy working with you and feel like their ideas matter.
I did stand up one time and then COVID happened and I didn't pick it up. It was one of the most, and stand up is very different than improv, just to put that out. Stand up is more acting. You pretend like you're spontaneously saying things that you absolutely memorized. So it's much more being an actor than it is being an improv comedian. But it was terrifying, and people not thinking that I'm funny is probably one of like the worst insults that I could get. It is such an interesting experience being on the stage and having people judge your humor. Talking about social anxiety exposure, it's wonderful for that too. So even if you're more of a stand-up person, it's worthwhile giving it a try. Okay. Back to getting a job. Okay, so get your research experience while you're in school. If you're an intern, if you are a postdoc, and if you're an early career professional, And I mean, this could even be a later career professional that's changing careers. Because I changed careers midway through. What experiences do you recommend people find if they're trying to get into this job and they might already be working or working in some capacity?
And coming from a mental health research standpoint in particular, there was a lot of emphasis. It is changing, but I think there historically has been a lot of emphasis on quantitative research. So, just in terms of statistics that we're doing, and less of a focus, at least for me and a lot of the peers that I encountered, on, say, focus groups or qualitative research. And in this setting, one of the first new things I had to learn was that sort of qualitative approach. Fortunately, as a clinical psychologist, I had skills in clinical interviewing and facilitating groups. So I was able to draw from that and apply it in a new way. Leading a focus group is not the same as leading a therapy group, but I wasn't starting from nothing. But if I had had that better understanding of the frameworks and theories, I think that would have been useful. That said, there's a lot of broad training. My director of clinical training when I was in graduate school always told us that we had such skills as clinical psychologists. We were learning so many things. And I thought that he was just saying that to make us feel better about going into internship applications and dissertations. And maybe it was a bit of both, but he certainly was right. There's a lot when you get away from just people who are trained like you and do what you do into a diverse multidisciplinary setting that really does become true. So leveraging your skills, but getting exposure to qualitative research would have been really, really helpful. Other things that are definitely increasingly more common and emphasized in training programs, including through postdoctoral and fellowships, is the focus on equity. So not just coming in with limited, or I think of horse blinders as a visual analogy approach to studying a problem, but how can we be more inclusive, not only in terms of the design and implementation, but understanding the language we're using to interpret and communicate those findings. How can we be cognizant of and promoting equity and the thoughtfulness that goes into it all along the way? I think that is an area in which social work, clinical psychology, other sort of mental health disciplines are inclined to be aware of already, but really taking that to the next level is certainly at RTI somewhere where we're doing really important work that's meant to affect policy. It has to be able to apply to everyone who might be affected by the policy, if that makes sense. Learning how to quickly distill information and share it with other audiences, similar to our last conversation about communication. I might be talking in back-to-back meetings to a collaborating study site where they know the skills of the on-the-ground implementation, but are not the ones trained in or responsible for the conduct of the research. And then I might go to the internal research team of what's our logistics plan, and then we might be talking with the statisticians to say, hey, here's what we're looking to learn, or we have something new that's coming up in the assessment. How do we methodologically account for that? And then we might have a report due to the funder, and how do we provide an update on progress to someone who may not be trained in mental health themselves, but is responsible for managing the portfolio. That's a lot of different audiences. And then I go home and tell my family about what I did at work that day. There's another audience. So being able to meet folks where they're at in terms of, where are they coming in, what do they care about, and how do you speak directly to that?
All right. A theme I'm really picking up is research and communication.
Yes.
Get your research in and get, whether it's communicating the research through conferences or whatever, or novel experiences, being able to communicate, like doing community work where you're taking, let's say, parenting principles and bringing it out and teaching people how to convert that research into something that's digestible for people in a 2-hour or 1-hour parenting talk. Or there's different ways that you could practice communicating to various audiences effectively.
And I'll add a third thing. It's being a good listener and a good learner. I have been talking about the strengths of applied mental health training. There's so much that I've learned. And I think about some of those first meetings I was on when I came to start my job, and just being really amazed by all these bright minds and their different training backgrounds and perspectives, or just years on the job and experience in settings like this, and being able to learn so much. And how do you take that and apply it and integrate it to your own framework of knowledge and experiences is really important. I think otherwise you just perpetuate the silo. So there's a lot to give and share from mental health, but those there's also a lot to learn as a mental health voice on a team.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like I know we talked about it last episode, having this multidisciplinary and a lot of people that are interested in the pursuit of knowledge. So when I first started this podcast, I was in private practice pretty much by myself, and I didn't have too many people to talk to or regularly learn from. So one of my motivations for doing this was that if I could get people smarter than me in front of me, I could ask them questions about things that I actually want to know, and I can improve my clinical skills and learning. And it really, it really helped me. So that's one thing when you are considering a career, is that there are some jobs where you're going to be more siloed by yourself, and there's going to be more jobs where you have the opportunity to learn from a lot of different people. And it's not necessarily right or wrong, because I just had to do extra things in order to get that. But there's pros in my job probably that you need to seek for in yours. But it definitely is something to consider when you're considering your career paths. Mentoring and networking. And I know we touched on this a bit, and there's evidence that people that have good mentors are more successful. And it makes sense because there's someone, it's kind of like therapy. There's someone that's supporting you. There's someone that has positive regard for you. But in this case, when it's a mentor, it's someone teaching you, and it's someone that's in your vein that has experience of the world that you're in and how they got there, so they could bestow that knowledge down to you. And one of life's best teachers, doing and learning from the trial and error from doing it. But the other big pathway is having someone else that already did those things, and having them bestow some of that knowledge. And the combination of the both is probably the best way to go here. How have you found ways, or how do you recommend that people find mentors? And that is one vein. Then the other one is networking, which is more of a broad spectrum, which is meeting a lot of people that might be more experienced than you, less experienced you, equally experienced as you, but it's more about volume and connecting to a lot of people.
Excellent question. I'll answer both in turn. So in terms of mentoring, a potential misconception is that by leaving a formal training setting, like a university setting, like an academic medical center, a VA medical center, where there's a formal designation of mentor and explicit awareness that training is woven into the role, that's not necessarily explicitly made in somewhere like an industry or not-for-profit setting. However, I'll say certainly from my personal experience, it feels the same, even though there's no word in a brochure or handbook about what life is like as an employee where I am. And I also get to serve as the mentor in addition to benefiting from mentorship. I have two people that come to mind that have been my mentor. We use the M word. We define the relationship as mentoring, and it was a it was a really fun way to feel like I had a safe person, like you said, who had my back. One of them in particular has ended a couple of our conversations saying, hey, my job is just to help you avoid some of those lessons learned the hard way by sharing my experiences and pointing you in the right direction. And so that's so helpful, because I'm, like we said last episode, I'm leading a clinical trial right now. I've been really trained to do that, and it's my first time doing it. And there's a lot of new learning, and there's a lot of anxiety that can come into that sometimes. And so having a mentor who's done that many times before and can guide me and be that safe space to share some of that vulnerability is amazing. Also, another mentor who's not in my discipline and role, but has really taken me under her wing and helping me to understand some of the more management or setting specific behaviors and activities that I wasn't necessarily trained for in graduate training. And so having them in my corner has been incredible. I've also left at opportunities to be able to provide that mentorship to others that I work with. And so these could be, any discipline, any degree path or terminal degree achieved, but getting to train and thinking about the amazing mentors I've had from graduate school to now, and what were the qualities and what were the behaviors specifically that made those such positive and impactful relationships, and how have I been able to incorporate that. We have, where I am, annual goals that we set for ourselves that go across domains, and we speak with managers about them, and we self-assess and we get feedback on it. And I've been able to make mentoring junior staff one of mine, and that's been really, really exciting to have space to explicitly talk about it. I also want to separate the role of a mentor from a sponsor. because that distinction was really helpful for me when I first learned about it. And so the way I understand a mentor, like you said, it's someone who is providing a lot of emotional support, as well as probably is trained or familiar with the roles or skills or expectations. And so learning how to be a blank, whether it's, a clinical supervisor who plays a mentoring role, or a research supervisor, or a faculty mentoring, teaching, skills development. A sponsor is someone who serves a different function, and sometimes the roles can overlap. The same individual can serve in both roles, but not necessarily required or always happens. A sponsor is someone who leverages their social capital and their position and their power to give you opportunities. And so someone who can advocate for you to hire up leadership, for example, of, hey, we have this task force, who'd be really good for that job is Jason. I've seen him do X, Y, Z. He's got the time. I think he can handle it. Someone who's going to put you in a position where they're also risking their own reputation and social capital. If you fail, if you just don't deliver, if you drop the ball and do something unprofessional, their reputation's on the line, but they're willing to leverage their reputation that they have to give you the chance to shine and earn some reputation and capital of your own. And so having mentors and sponsors, ideally someone who can serve for both for you, is something that's really important. It's also an explicit distinction that I make in thinking about some of the junior staff that I've mentored, of how can I give the staff who are, everyone's ready for the next thing, but how can I make sure to identify a challenge that's an appropriate level given where they're coming from, so that they have a chance to shine and get the credit for something that happens in the context of a supportive team environment.
One thing you said there was having multiple mentors, and I think that's a really important principle. So like I own my own business, and I very much have someone that is a business mentor that I don't talk at all much clinical stuff with, but someone that I know and I'm like, oh geez, I don't know what to do in this situation. This is new, this is novel. I might not do exactly what he says, but I could bounce the ideas off of him. And then I have a clinical mentor when I'm stuck clinically that I could go to and talk there. So particularly if like you're in like a doctoral program, you think about having like a mentor. It doesn't need to be that rigid. Like you could have a couple and they could all have different areas. And even think outside of your job, if you have a passionate hobby that you do, get a mentor there too, or a sponsor. I never knew about that distinction. So that was a very cool learning for me. How have you found ways to better network? Because the more people that know your name, the more people that know you, the more people that have a positive regard for you, the easier it is to grow, navigate, and do cool and interesting things.
Willingness to put yourself out there. And I say this as a proud exposure therapist, trained in exposure therapy, is to do it and go for it. So speaking up in meetings is one usually opportunity that's usually available to many people, and is also anxiety provoking for a lot of people, especially if you are in a room where there's a lot of people above you, or you might feel like you don't necessarily have something unique or important to offer on group time in a larger group setting. And I would say if it's relevant, to go for it. It's something I initially had to really force myself to do explicitly and deliberately, of planning it and just learning to be more comfortable with it, with not to say that you should be speaking up every time there's a meeting. It's sharing the space and not only claiming it for yourself, but by contributing thoughtful ideas or suggestions, by being part of the problem-solving team. So not only identifying problems, but suggesting solutions. That is really valuable to others, including others in leadership positions. And so I would say speaking up in meetings is one way to do that, as well as, and maybe this is a culture across organizations, I'm able to put myself on anyone's Outlook calendar that I please. It's a wonderful culture where I am, and it goes both ways. So I'll have people appear on my calendar, and I don't know what we're going to talk about, but it'll be productive, I'm sure. And so inviting folks to coffee, to lunch, or having a quick 25-minute informational meeting, or just getting to know folks in the organization that you're at, has been really helpful. Ideally, you have a manager, a supervisor who can help facilitate that. Can also step into the sponsoring role if you express that, hey, I'd like to be able to meet, the leadership team. What's something I can do? There's usually administrative help or a task force or work groups that would benefit from contributions. And so there's a space. That also applies to networking outside of your employment or your organization. So I, as an example, at ABCT, have been fortunate to have served in lots of volunteer as well as leadership roles. It's been really important to me from a value standpoint of ABCT has offered a lot to me as a student and junior professional and now a fully fledged professional. And so it feels not only like a valuable way to contribute back, it's also afforded a lot of new professional relationships that I certainly would not have had otherwise. Skills development and just thinking of other ways of giving back that I would never have considered myself to be value added in a room or at a table. And so I would say leaning into professional organizations. I think general things like being willing to talk to people in general across your life, those skills will translate. Things become easier the more that you're doing it. Again, signing off as this exposure therapist.
Mm-hmm. Well, that wasn't an intentional plug on your part, but I'm going to take it. If you're not a member of ABCT, consider joining. Go to ABCT. Whatever, which I think is not right. But anyway, it is a very good organization, and I've had the same experience that you did, which is meeting a lot of people that I otherwise wouldn't have met. But I think the critical thing is not being scared to ask, not being scared to approach. I've made very good connections and very good leaps and bounds by asking and volunteering. And if you will do those two things, knowing that you might get shot down a bunch of times, if you get 10% yeses, that's 10% more yeses than you had before. And you've built yourself much more opportunity, and you've built yourself more networking, more connection, maybe mentoring, sponsoring. So my biggest piece of advice for people is don't be scared to ask, and don't be scared to cold ask, meaning, oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And to be persistent. Yeah. Cold asking. So I had cold emailed someone at RTI who was doing research I didn't know you could do somewhere at a place like RTI. And we got coffee, and she's the one mentor that I mentioned earlier, who's not the psychology mentor. Being willing to reach out and also willing to be persistent. If someone doesn't respond, it's probably not because they don't like you or you don't have skills or that it wasn't a good idea to do it. They're probably busy, or maybe they don't check that other email very often, or maybe they switched organizations and that particular email address that you got from wherever the source that you did isn't valid anymore. I mentor an incredibly bright woman who is at a university nearby where I live, who cold messaged me on LinkedIn saying that she was a sophomore and she was interested in this career path and could we meet? And we meet every month, and I had a call with her yesterday, and she's applying for summer internships. Amazing. And I did not have that sort of willingness to experience rejection and bravery when I was at that stage. So I think it's so fantastic, and really definitely would encourage cold emails, cold calls, messages. Many people are really happy to help and probably benefited from informational interviews and mentoring before, and look forward to opportunities to pay it forward themselves.
Well, and also flattered. Like when somebody's like, hey, I'm impressed or I'm interested in what you're doing. We all love to hear that, right? So it's not like people are like angry that you are, that you want to work with them. They might be too busy. They might not be able to do it. But I think for most people, it's going to be a positive interaction. I would like this literally just happened to me where somebody emailed me after ABCT like 3 times. It was like Thanksgiving. I was on a trip to Nicaragua. Then it was the holidays, and I had a bunch of business stuff, and I just completely forgot. And then they emailed me again 2 months later, and I emailed back apologizing and saying, I had full intention to email you back. It was just chaos, and I'm so sorry. Let's get a time on my calendar to talk about the project that you want to do. So I think that's very sage advice. Just because you don't hear back doesn't mean that someone doesn't like you. It doesn't mean that they're angry. It doesn't mean that they're not interested. Sometimes things fall through the crack, or sometimes people are just particularly busy at a point in time. So being a little bit persistent, not too persistent. Sometimes you do have to take no for an answer. So it's a balance. Any other advice, so if people want the job that you have, so besides getting the education, besides getting the research, besides finding a mentor and learning how to communicate effectively to a broad spectrum of stakeholders, anything else that you would throw in there to get them so they could get this job? Like they want your job. How can they get your job?
Patience and intolerance of uncertainty are other things that are needed. And part of that's because a job like mine, where it's not synced with a training cycle or an academic year. There's not necessarily a cycle in which you can expect job positions to open. And so it can take a long time for the right job posting to be listed, or maybe what looks like an amazing job and opportunity. I'm deliberately not using the term dream job, but a really good opportunity comes across and you aren't in a good place yourself. You're only halfway, say, through your postdoc training. And I do find postdoctoral research, or postdoctoral training incredibly valuable, even if you aren't going to stay in that particular setting. So say it's just not the time for you to apply, even though it looks great. Just hang tight. Something will cycle back through. Or if you apply for a position that's even not perhaps right over the plate, but it's an organization that you're looking to get into, and it's close enough, you could be a competitive applicant and could probably be happy enough in that role if you took it. Maybe it won't work for that offer, but they have your resume now, and now they know about you, and it can make it that much easier to strike a conversation or be considered for another positioning that's coming down the road later ahead. So willingness to check online, not too often. I was doing it daily for a while, and the anxiety. Maybe keep it to once a week. I would say look for postings if you're figuring it out, because there's not a predictable cycle the way that there can be for university-based or other positions that are married neatly with a training program.
And it's okay to take steps along the way. Some of us are lucky and we get into a position that we want to be in kind of first try, or maybe not first try, but very quickly. And then there's other times, no fault to the person, nothing wrong with the person, that luck didn't go their way, and you have to take a half step to get closer to where you want to be. And just because you're taking half step, or maybe those are quarter steps to where you want to go, doesn't mean that you're going to fall behind. It doesn't mean that maybe at some point you'll surpass the person that got the thing that you wanted right away. Life isn't that simple. Life isn't linear. Life goes up, down, left, right, zigzags, way leads on to way. So don't, going off your point, don't throw away potential opportunities that are almost there if you're not finding what you want, because that might be exactly what you need to do to get to where you want to be.
I had someone give the distinction between a ladder and a lattice, where a lattice idea of there's only one way and it's forward, and there's only one step ahead. It's the next rung that you put your foot on, and that's required, the only way to get to the next one, versus a lattice, which has more navigable paths forward, and you can go laterally and you can go down, and that can all be in the overall movement towards your goal. And I found that to be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And it reduces your stress. I don't know what a lattice is. I'm going to have to look it up afterwards, but I'm assuming it's like it looks like Mario, and when he's climbing on the wall, dodging all the Koopas, if anybody played the old school Mario, like Mario 3. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think school teaches us to think too linearly. Like, you go to this school, then you go to middle school, then you go to high school, then you go to boom. And you really get stuck in that mindset of, I remember after postdoc having, I don't want to call it like a quarter life crisis, but I remember I got a job and it blew my mind that I wasn't working towards something. And it took me probably a year to get comfortable with the idea that I'm just doing this thing now. Like, and I'm just going to I'm not going to be moving. I'm not going to be going to a new program. I'm not going to be getting another degree. I'm not going to be getting another checkbox. It's just like life.
And that change can be scary. I even remember the really scary feeling when I was deciding, do I leave the VA, or I was really happy. It's thinking of my licensure test and an approach conflict. I was really happy where I was and with the people I was working with, and at the same time I was also really attracted to this opportunity that came by with RTI, and it felt scary of like, but I was tracked, I was doing this thing, and there's risk and vulnerability and unknown with stepping from that, or so even when it's by choice and by design that you're stepping off of the track you're on, that can feel scary, and that's okay.
Oh, it's definitely okay. And it's okay to change tracks.
Yes.
I've said on the show multiple times, I got a PhD in clinical psychology, but I went to be a forensic evaluator. And I did my internship at the largest forensic hospital in the United States. And I did a postdoctoral fellowship, 100% in forensic assessment. And I lived in Seattle. And I worked for the state doing forensic evaluations full time. And I was not happy. It wasn't the job for me. And I switched gears. And that's okay. I think a lot of people get stuck with it, like sunk costs, meaning I did all this stuff. I made all this investment. Therefore, I need to keep investing. But no matter how much you invest in a bad investment, it doesn't become a good investment. And that could be job, that could be relationship, that could be actual, like a real, like a real, like life investment, like a stock or something like that. So when you're thinking about your career paths too, because we were talking a lot about grad students, and if you are 10 years into your career and you want to make a change, I don't know if it's a good idea for you to make a change or not. And that's a whole bigger conversation, but don't take it off the table. At least consider it, think about it, think if it's a good idea for you, do a pros and cons list, talk to mentors, talk to other people, and maybe that's a right thing for you to do. And any other life words of wisdom about picking jobs and not being so static in our approach to living this chaotic life that humans live?
I find that talking to different people has been really helpful. I am fortunate to have gotten very close with my cohort from graduate school. We're still very close. Our text thread still goes off about 100 times a day. It's been that way for years. And so leaning on someone who is trained in what you're training, understands the world. You don't have to define certain things because they just get it. They share that professional culture. Also talking to people who are professionals, not in that culture. I'm thinking of one undergraduate friend with whom I'm still close, and someone who can think about it from a different lens, but still kind of objective as a professional fork in the road or decision. And then the people who know me, I don't have to define me or my terms. They know my weaknesses, they know my tendencies, and they know my potential, and they probably have the overly positive view of me, and so can think about my happiness and things that I might be more inclined to sacrifice for something else that seems like it's important, that's maybe more material. And so by triangulating or crowdsourcing across those different audiences, usually there can be some consistencies or clarity that comes from that. So really figuring out, who do I trust to have a conversation, knowing I don't have to do what they say, like we talked about mentors too, right? Seeking consultation from people who know what they're talking about or know me.
Mm-hmm. And that last example, somebody that really knows you, that probably likes you, like thinks more positive than you are. I'm thinking like my mom.
Yeah. Like, parents.
Is that what you were?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Listen, go to everybody, get multiple point of views. I think you're right. I think not siloing. I said siloing a lot. I'm on an anti-siloing mission, meaning people getting stuck in doing things one way and not taking in multiple approaches and thinking, because we naturally as humans tend to silo over time.
And seek confirmation. The confirmation bias is another thing of not only talking to people who are going to be yes people or who, you know, are going to agree with you, getting those pushbacks, the healthy pushbacks, so you can really think with wise mind, balancing your heart and the emotions as well as what rationally seems to make most sense on paper.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever learn about the gorilla study with the radiologist?
Where it was an image in like a scan. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was the siloing study where they had like seasoned radiologists looking at different images and marking down like what was wrong. And basically I don't know this is from the research study. Like they get into a pattern of how they check the things, because the more seasoned you get at something, the more heuristics you build and models you build to be more efficient, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a really good neural mechanism that we have as a species, and it's wonderful. But in one of the pictures, they put a mini picture of a gorilla that was grayscaled, like in the lung or whatever the organ was. And they looked at how many radiologists picked up the mini picture of the gorilla, and the numbers weren't great.
They were looking for what they were looking for.
They were looking
gorillas.
for what they were looking for, not gorillas. And so that's my point on siloing, and my anti-siloing mission that I've been doing at work and in my supervision is, don't get stuck looking at things in one way. We tend to get stuck on that. You always need to work on staying expansive and looking at different perspectives, checking your confirmation bias, checking your biases, and making sure that you're not getting too dogged. And I say, when somebody has "this is the wayism," which is from The Mandalorian. I don't know if you watch The Mandalorian, which is a Star Wars thing, but the Mandalorians go, "This is the way." And they're like a very dogmatic culture about that. There's a very strict code on how you operate. When people get into "this is the wayism," that's always a time to check yourself on if you've gone too biased in an area. Maybe you're right, but having a nice double check is not the worst thing when you get into it. This is the wayism. This is how it has to be done. This is how, like, the other ways are wrong. Anyway, a little side. So one more question for you. So like if somebody wants to get into a PhD program in clinical psychology, that comes to mind because that was my track. One of the biggest barriers is available slots. Nationally, there are way more people applying than there are people that the spots for people to get in. And when I talk to a lot of people on this podcast and a lot of like known people about grad school, like I joke and say, I don't know if I could get in now. If
Every
I was
cohort says
now,
that to the next cohort.
but people say that. I mean, people that are seasoned professionals are saying this, that are well-known entities. So that's a big barrier to getting into the programs. Getting into your field, what do you think the biggest barriers are in this case for getting the job if this is the job that they want? And it might not be, it could be the amount of jobs that are available, and that might be part of the answer, but are there other barriers that you think that get in the way?
Jobs that are available. I think it depends on what track or level you're coming in from. So coming into a principal investigator, project director track, there will either need to be a lot of ongoing projects that need you and can support you at your rate. So from a salary standpoint, can they afford to bring you on, or are you bringing in funded projects yourself? So having the support so that there's not too much of a bridge that's needed can be a factor. I think where you are on a map, that's perhaps less restrictive now since COVID taught a lot of organizations that they can allow their employees to be flexibly located and hybrid or teleworking as opposed to necessarily being in person, that the ability to relocate after a lot of, like you said, clinical psychologists, there can be multiple relocations involved in that. And so that can remove a barrier. I think that used to be more important. I'm having a hard time thinking of others, or at least really big ones that might affect a lot of people considering this track.
Okay. You were mentioning that you were refreshing the job posting page every single day for a while there, which is not an anxiety response at all. Where are these jobs posted? Like, is there one place to like go to look if someone wants to be looking for the jobs, or were you like looking at specific jobs and like refreshing like on their individual pages? Or
I was
like,
looking at specific organizations or companies. There's a lot of pre-work involved, and it wasn't fun, and it involved a lot of cliches that annoyed me in the past, but now I agree with, like, do your homework. What does that even mean? What I think it means is just spending hours online on weekends or after work. It did take a lot of time figuring out where are these opportunities. So for me, I did want to stay in research. I was looking for additional places to do that. And then I learned by looking at organizations that hired people trained as psychologists or that did mental health research that a mission focus was really important to me. And that's when I did restrict it to not-for-profits or other missions that still resonated with things that were important to me as a professional. And then, yes, checking the postings, there's different lingo across not only sectors and settings, but specific individuals, competitor organizations within the same sector and field can use different terms. And so just getting exposure, looking at the websites. I went on YouTube and found videos of CEOs from those companies talking just to try to better understand the world. If you can get a cold call or an informational interview with someone, that's certainly helpful. I have a friend who's very successfully used LinkedIn job alerts. If you're looking for federal jobs, jobs.gov, I think, is a place. I think to the extent to which you're comfortable and have safe people that you can share that you're looking for another opportunity, they can look out for you, spread your name, pass along opportunities that they learn about. Listservs are really important. So getting onto organization listservs, whether it's national professional organizations or perhaps something more niche that I didn't personally use. I live in Durham, North Carolina, which is part of the Research Triangle of North Carolina, and there's something called Research Triangle Park.
We overlap twice. Seattle and Durham. Yep.
And so for folks who aren't familiar with it, it's a really exciting hub. It's developing, it's growing, and just really excited about the prospects. So I was able to go to research Triangle Foundation and just look at I exported to Excel a list of the organizations. Then I went to each website, learned about what they did, had a yes, maybe no pile, and started going through it. And so that was a way to do it. It's rare to have something that kind of consolidated like head start that it gave me, but it just took a lot of time. But I would not skip over the pre-work of figuring out, what do you enjoy doing? So I came up with a list of what are all the things that I do during a day, or I can expect to do at the next level or step after postdoc. And then I circled the ones that I really enjoyed doing and kind of identified the ones that weren't my favorite, but weren't awful. And I'm certainly happy to do that in order to do the things that I value doing a lot more. And then I had a big mark for the ones that were just miserable. They were draining. They were not invigorating. They were draining. And I didn't really think they were necessary in order to do the things I enjoyed the most. And so that was just really clarifying of, what do I enjoy doing? And therefore, what are probably the jobs that are going to give me more of the things I value and fewer of the things that I don't. So I don't want to just jump forward to looking for jobs. Figuring out what you want to do first is a really important and personal step.
Yeah. I mean, that was doing your homework, sitting down, laying it out, putting all the thing. But I think that's a fantastic process and recommendation for people to go through, regardless of what job, like any job search.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us and telling us all the things that you know about your the field that you're in and how people could get the job. I'm sure there's a bunch of people here that are taking notes and they're writing down all these recommendations on what to do to prep for the job. So, well, thanks again. And hopefully we will see you back again soon.
Thanks for the opportunity to contribute. It was a real pleasure getting to join you today.